Billionaire saw a hard-working waitress fired for bringing her baby. His next move shocked everyone. The morning rush at Sunrise Diner was relentless. Plates clattered, orders piled up, and Mariah moved like she was made of muscle and hope, her ponytail swinging, apron cinched tight. No one could miss the tiny girl on her hip. Ava, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, clutching her mother's sleeve as if she understood everything depended on Mariah's speed and smile. From table 7, a silent guest in a charcoal suit observed the scene with restless eyes. Alexander Hayes, the billionaire owner, could have been just another executive passing through. Instead, he saw Mariah's hands trembling when the phone buzzed, or her forced smile when a customer complained. He watched the moment. Mariah slid behind the counter to change Ava's bottle. Cheeks flushed from effort and embarrassment, lips moving in soft encouragement. "Just a few more minutes, baby. Mommy's almost done." Manager Collins strode out from the kitchen as if the air itself belonged to him. His face was red, voice sharp and cold. "Mariah," his words sliced through the chatter, "give me one good reason why your child is here." Mariah straightened her back, holding Ava tighter. "Please, Collins. I had no choice. My sitter's in the hospital. I can keep Ava quiet. I'll clean up after every shift. Just this once." He scowled without a hint of sympathy. "You know the rules. No kids in the workplace. If you can't follow them, you're out." A hush fell. Even the regulars, who knew Mariah by her kindness, her speed, her tired eyes, looked up from their coffee. Mariah pleaded softly, voice cracking. "Please, sir, we're alone. I need this job. I need to provide for her." But Collins wouldn't listen. He pointed at the door and spoke with cruel finality. "You're fired. I won't repeat myself. Take your child and leave." Mariah stared for a second that stretched forever. Tears formed, but she didn't let them fall in front of anyone but Ava. She whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy tried," then bundled the child close and walked out, dignity clinging to her like the morning chill. Alexander Hayes stood and left a stack of bills on the table. He followed Mariah through the diner's swinging glass door, barely hesitating. Outside, amidst the swirl of cars and November air, he called her name. Everything that happened next would rewrite both their lives. Before the story unfolds, drop a comment below with your city and what time it is. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want more stories that prove one moment can change everything. Mariah didn't even feel the cold until the diner door closed behind her. The noise of plates and voices cut off in an instant, replaced by the harsh sound of traffic and the tiny hiccuping cries of her daughter. Ava's fingers tangled in the loose strings of Mariah's apron as if she were trying to hold her together. Mariah shifted Ava higher on her hip, swallowing the sting in her throat. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, though nothing felt okay. "Mummy's here. Mummy's got you." She didn't dare look back at the glass door. Humiliation burned hot across her cheeks. Customers had watched. Some looked sorry. No one had stepped in. Rent, diapers, formula. The landlord's note taped to her door, with the words "Final Warning" underlined twice, flashed through her mind like a siren she couldn't shut off. Missing this week's pay wasn't just a setback, it was a disaster that could put them on the street. "Mariah," the voice came from behind her, steady, low, and unfamiliar. She turned slowly. The man from table 7 stood a few steps away, the morning light catching the neat line of his jaw and the subtle sheen of his suit. Up close, he looked even more out of place. Expensive watch, perfectly pressed shirt, polished shoes that had never seen a double shift in grease and coffee spills. "I'm sorry," Mariah said automatically, tightening her hold on Ava. "If you're looking for takeout, I don't work here anymore." His brow furrowed at that. "I know," he said quietly. "My name is Alexander Hayes." The name meant nothing to her. She didn't read business magazines. She read bus schedules and overdue notices. Alexander glanced back at the diner, at Collins pacing behind the counter, then returned his focus to Mariah and the small girl clinging to her. "I saw everything," he continued. "I'm one of the owners." Her stomach twisted. Of all the people to see her fired like that, of course it had to be someone important. Someone who could have her blacklisted in every restaurant in the city with a single phone call. "Look, sir," she said, voice frayed. "I know bringing Ava in was against the rules. I don't normally do that. I had no childcare, no backup, no—" She stopped herself before the word options turned into a sob. "I'll leave town if I have to. I won't make trouble. Just, please don't make things worse with a bad reference." Alexander's expression shifted, something like pain flickering behind his composed face. "I'm not here to make things worse," he said softly. "I came out because what happened in there was wrong." Mariah stared at him, stunned into silence. A car horn blared at the intersection. A gust of wind slipped under Ava's blanket, making the baby whimper. Mariah instinctively turned her body, shielding her daughter from the cold. "You shouldn't have been fired for showing up when you had no other choice," Alexander said. "You kept working. You kept smiling. You kept your tables moving. I've sat in that building for months, watching people do half of what you did today without half your pressure." She blinked, not trusting any of it. Compliments didn't pay rent. Sympathy didn't put food in her cabinets. "Thank you," she managed, her voice small. "But that job was all I had." "That's why I followed you," he replied. "Because this doesn't end with you walking off that property alone." He hesitated a brief moment, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Can you sit for a minute? There's a bench by the bus stop." She glanced toward the corner. The bus stop bench offered no real privacy, just a slightly quieter stretch of sidewalk and a schedule taped to a pole that lied about arrivals half the time. But Ava was fussy, her little body twisting, tired from the early morning chaos. "5 minutes," Mariah said. "My bus comes soon." They walked in silence to the bench. Mariah sat, cradling Ava against her chest, rubbing gentle circles on her back as the baby's cries softened to sleepy whimpers. Alexander stayed standing at first, then slowly lowered himself onto the far end of the bench, leaving respectful space between them. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She's tired," Mariah said, eyes on Ava. "We were up before 5. The sitter called from the hospital. No backup, no family nearby." "No one you can call at all?" "Not at 6 in the morning on a Monday," she replied, a hint of tired humor breaking through. "My mother's 3 states away and only has a flip phone she charges once a week. My friends work the same shifts I do. Everyone's just trying to keep their own heads above water." Alexander nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. "Mariah," he said, turning slightly toward her, "I didn't just invest in that diner for the profit. It was supposed to be a place where working people could actually feel respected. What I saw in there was the opposite of that." She lifted her gaze to his for the first time, searching his face. "With respect, sir, you still get paid either way. I don't." The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw but honest. He didn't flinch. "You're right," he said. "I go home either way. but that's exactly why it matters how I use the power I have. For a moment, the world shrank to the three of them on that bench. A billionaire in a flawless suit, a young woman whose shoes were worn at the edges, and a baby girl drifting in and out of restless sleep. "Here's what I'm prepared to do," Alexander said quietly. "First, you won't need to worry about today's lost wages. I'll make sure you get what you've already earned and more. Second, I want to offer you a position at one of my hotel restaurants. Same kind of work, but better pay, stable hours, and a manager who understands that employees are human beings, some of them parents, before they're anything else." Mariah stared at him, unable to process the words all at once. Jobs didn't fall from the sky, certainly not from men who wore watches that probably cost more than everything in her apartment. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he answered. "I watched you juggle 6 tables with a baby on your hip and not once snap at anyone. I saw the way you apologized for things that weren't your fault just to keep the peace. I saw the way you held your daughter when that man spoke to you like you were disposable." He paused, the memory clearly bothering him. "And I've seen that scene before, in my own life. I'd told myself if I was ever in a position to change it for someone else, I would." Something in his tone made Mariah look at him differently. There was steel there, but also something older, an ache that didn't belong to money or titles. "Look," she said slowly, "I'm grateful you care, really, but I don't want to be a project. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me." His response was immediate, almost firm. "This isn't charity, Mariah. You'd be hired because you're good at what you do. I've owned enough businesses to recognize talent. I'm only making sure one manager's bad decision doesn't destroy the rest of your options." A bus rumbled into view down the street. Mariah checked the route number automatically. Wrong line. She had a few more minutes. "What about childcare?" she asked, practical instincts cutting through the fog of shock. "If I work nights, daycares are closed. If I work early mornings, sitters bail. You saw how fast everything fell apart today." Alexander nodded, glad she was asking concrete questions instead of backing away. "We can work with a set schedule," he said. "Not random shifts that change every week. I also partner with a nearby daycare that opens early for staff at the hotel. You'd have priority access. It isn't perfect, but it's a start." Mariah's mind raced. Set schedule, better pay, a manager who wouldn't throw her out in front of a full house because her life wasn't neat on paper. "Would I have to quit school?" she murmured, half to herself. "I'm taking night classes, trying to finish my hospitality certification. It's slow, but it's your way out of just surviving," Alexander finished gently. Her eyes flicked to his again. Surprised he understood so quickly. "We'd schedule around your classes where we can," he said. "You're not just a body carrying plates. You know this industry. That matters." Ava stirred, letting out a little sigh as she burrowed closer into Mariah's chest. The weight of her daughter was both an anchor and a reminder. Every choice Mariah made would either build something for Ava or break something they couldn't afford to lose. "What's the catch?" she asked. Not suspicious, just tired of discovering invisible fine print. "There's always one." "The only condition," Alexander replied, "is that you give yourself permission to step into something better than constant panic. No one here is doing you a favor by looking down on you. You've already paid your dues." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card, not flashy, just his name and a number. "Come to this address tomorrow at 10, he said. "That's the hotel. I'll have my HR director and the restaurant manager meet us. We'll talk about the position, your schedule, and what you need to make it work. If you decide you're not comfortable, you walk away. No pressure, no penalty." Mariah took the card carefully, as if it might disappear. The print was clean, the paper thick, the name Alexander Hayes, embossed in small, confident letters. "If I don't show up," she asked. "Then at least for today," he said softly, "you'll know that someone saw you and knew you deserved better than what happened in there." A strange feeling rose in her chest, something fragile and unfamiliar. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the wall of hopelessness that had been closing in for months. The bus she needed finally turned the corner, brakes hissing as it approached. Mariah stood, adjusting Ava, her arm already aching from holding her all morning. "I'll think about it," she said carefully. "I can't promise anything. I have to figure out everything." "That's fair," Alexander replied, rising as well. "Just don't throw the card away tonight because you're afraid it's too good to be true. Sometimes the right door really does open on the worst day of your life." She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You talk like someone who's had a few of those." "More than a few," he admitted. The bus doors folded open with a tired screech. Mariah climbed the steps, dropped her last few crumpled bills into the fare slot, and took a seat near the middle. Through the window, she watched Alexander step back onto the sidewalk. Hands in his coat pockets, face unreadable as he watched the bus pull away. Ava yawned, her lashes fluttering. Mariah looked down at the business card in her palm, her thumb tracing the letters. "Do you think Mommy should go, Ava?" she whispered. "Or is this just another thing that disappears when we reach out?" Ava responded by pressing her tiny hand over the card like a seal. For the first time that morning, Mariah let herself imagine a week where the landlord didn't threaten to change the locks, a month where she wasn't choosing between formula and electricity, a future where she worked in a place that didn't punish her for loving her child. She closed her hand around the card and leaned back against the bus seat, exhaustion crashing over her. But under the exhaustion, something else pulsed. Quiet, unfamiliar, almost reckless. Hope. Mariah didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Collins's finger pointed at the door, heard the words, "You're fired," and felt the weight of Ava in her arms as if she were the only anchor keeping them from drifting into nothing. Her tiny apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional rumble of a passing car outside. The walls were thin enough to hear her neighbor's television and the pipes clanking when someone upstairs turned on a tap. Ava finally drifted off in the thrift store crib that wobbled slightly if you bumped it too hard. Mariah sat at the small kitchen table, a single overhead bulb casting tired light over a stack of envelopes. Rent notice, utility bill, a late payment reminder from the hospital. In the middle of those papers lay a small white business card. "Alexander Hayes," she read under her breath, tracing the embossed letters again. She had checked his name online on her cracked phone as soon as Ava fell asleep. Hotels, restaurants, properties she'd only ever seen from bus windows when cleaning staff poured out in uniforms at shift change. Interviews with his photo, headlines about his self-made success, articles calling him one of the youngest hospitality moguls in the region. She'd scrolled until her data warning flashed red. "Why would a man like that follow me to a bus stop?" she whispered, half to herself, half to the silent room. because he'd seen something, because he'd been angry, because when he spoke about what happened inside the diner, there had been a thread in his voice that didn't sound like performance. It sounded like memory. Mariah rubbed her eyes. Her body ached from hours on her feet, but her mind refused to shut down. Images clicked past like scenes in a film. Her as a teenager, wiping tables at a different place, listening to the cook mutter that young girls never last. Her in a hospital bed, staring at a blank space where the father of her child should have been. Her mother's voice on the phone from 3 states away, apologizing for not being able to send more than a little money, telling her to stay strong, to finish school. The babysitter's text that morning from an emergency room. Collins's voice in front of everyone. And then that stranger's calm, measured tone telling her he'd seen everything and that she deserved better. She pushed the bills aside and opened her worn notebook, the one with class notes and scribbles from late-night study sessions. At the top of one page, in handwriting from a night when she'd still believed she could change everything, she had written, "Goal, hospitality manager within 5 years." She looked from the goal to the card. "Sometimes," she murmured, "life doesn't hand you a ladder. It just rips the floor out from under you and hopes you find something to grab." Her phone buzzed. A message from her landlord. Reminder, rent due by Friday. No extensions this time. Mariah closed her eyes briefly, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth. Friday. 4 days. One closed door behind her. One possible open door waiting at 10 a.m. tomorrow in a hotel lobby she had only ever passed by. She looked over at Ava, sleeping with her little hand fisted near her cheek. "For you," Mariah whispered. "Everything I do is for you." She slipped the business card into her notebook, right between the page with her goal and a page covered in notes about customer service and staff management. Then she set an alarm for 6:30 a.m., just late enough to get a few hours of rest, just early enough to get herself and Ava ready if she decided to go. When her head finally hit the pillow, sleep came in fits and starts, filled with images of polished floors, white tablecloths, and a man in a charcoal suit waiting by an elevator, watching to see if she would walk toward him or turn away. Morning came with grey light creeping around the edges of the cheap blinds. Mariah's alarm vibrated on the mattress before the sound even kicked in. She rolled over, silenced it, and lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. "You don't have to go," Fear whispered. "You can look for another diner job closer to home." "You can't afford to waste an opening," Reason replied. "You're almost out of time." Ava's soft babble from the crib ended the debate. Mariah pushed herself up, joints protesting, and went to lift her daughter. Ava reached up with sleepy arms, pressing her warm cheek against Mariah's shoulder. "Good morning, sunshine," Mariah murmured, swaying gently. "Big day today." She didn't tell Ava they might be going to meet a billionaire. She only knew they were going to walk into a building where doors were usually opened for people like him, not women like her. After a quick bath for Ava and the fastest shower she could manage for herself, Mariah stood in front of the mirror, pinned to the back of her bedroom door. Her options were limited. 2 pairs of jeans. One pair was too faded and frayed for anything that looked like an interview. The other was dark enough to pass if she paired them with the right top. She chose a simple white blouse she normally saved for class presentations and the only black flats she owned that didn't pinch by the second hour. She tied her hair back in a low, neat bun instead of her usual rushed ponytail. It made her look a little older, a little more composed. "Do I look like someone who belongs in a hotel lobby?" she asked her reflection quietly. The woman in the mirror looked tired, determined. She could work with that. Mariah dressed Ava in a clean onesie and soft leggings, then hesitated. Was she really going to bring her daughter to the hotel after what had just happened at the diner? But she didn't have a sitter. Affordable options required weeks of forms and waiting lists. Her usual sitter was still in the hospital, and Alexander had seen her with Ava. He knew she was never far from her. "I'll bring the stroller," she decided aloud. "If they don't want to see both of us, then this job was never really meant for us." With that, she packed Ava's bag. Extra clothes, diapers, wipes, a small bottle, a worn-out stuffed bunny with one ear slightly bent. She slipped her notebook and a pen into her own bag, along with the card. On the way out, she paused at the door, looking around the apartment. The sagging couch, the second-hand lamp, the chipped mug in the sink, the rent notice still on the table. This is not the end, she told herself firmly. This is the middle. Outside, the air had that chill that hinted winter was circling closer. She wrapped Ava in her pink blanket and locked the door behind them, the click of the bolt sounding louder than usual. The bus ride to downtown felt different than the ride back from the diner the day before. Yesterday, she'd been holding on to her last scraps of hope. Today, she was carrying a small, fragile possibility in her bag, in the form of a printed name and address. Ava pressed her face to the window, leaving a faint fog print on the glass. "See those big buildings?" Mariah asked softly. "One of those is where we're going. Mommy's going to try to make something happen for us today." Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. "For both of us," she added. The hotel towered above the street, like its own little world. Mariah stepped off the bus and had to tilt her head back to take in the upper floors. Glass reflecting the pale sky. The sliding doors at the entrance opened with a quiet whoosh every time a guest approached. A doorman in a neat uniform greeted people by name, pulling luggage on smooth rolling carts. She swallowed hard. This was not Sunrise Diner. There was no smell of burnt coffee or bacon grease, no overworked cook shouting orders, just soft music drifting from hidden speakers and the low murmur of guests checking in and out. "Here we go, Ava," she whispered, pushing the stroller forward. "No turning back now." Inside, the lobby was wide and bright, but not cold. Soft chairs were arranged in clusters. A long front desk curved gently along one side where staff stood in matching vests and calm smiles. For a split second, Mariah considered turning around and walking back out. Then she saw him. Alexander stood near a column, dressed in a deep blue suit today, hands lightly folded in front of him. He wasn't surrounded by assistants or on a call. He was simply waiting for her. He spotted her almost immediately and came forward, not too quickly, as if he understood that sudden movements might make a skittish person bolt. "Mariah," he said, his voice warm but steady. "You came." "Barely," she admitted, forcing a small smile. The bus was late, and Ava decided she didn't like her first outfit, so we had a wardrobe change. He glanced at the little girl in the stroller, whose wide eyes were drinking in every light and color. "Hi, Ava," he said gently. "Nice to meet you somewhere that doesn't smell like fried eggs." Mariah huffed a tiny laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing a fraction. "She doesn't know yet that there's a world outside our apartment and the diner," she said. "This is a lot." "For both of you," he replied. He gestured toward a seating area, a little away from the main flow of guests. There's a quieter corner over here. I've asked my HR director and restaurant manager to join us in a few minutes. Before they get here, I wanted to check in with you first. See how you're feeling about all this." "How I'm feeling," she repeated as they walked. "Honestly, overwhelmed, confused, slightly underdressed." He gave her a brief, sympathetic look. "For what it's worth, you're handling this with more composure than some executives I've seen lose their minds over a late room service order." They reached the cluster of armchairs. Mariah parked the stroller close, where she could keep a hand on the handle, and sat on the edge of a chair, back straight. "I don't know what to expect," she admitted. "I've done interviews before, but they were usually in the back of a small restaurant, not in a place like this. I don't want to waste your time if I'm not what you're looking for." Alexander sat across from her, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting lightly on his knees. "Mariah," he said, "yesterday you were working under pressure that most people never see. You still managed to keep your section running, calm down an upset customer, and soothe your daughter without dropping a plate. That's exactly the kind of person I want on my teams, someone who can keep things moving when everything tries to fall apart." She tried to believe him, but the part of her that had been bruised by years of casual dismissal fought back. "You saw one shift," she reminded him. "One bad day." "I saw one bad day," he agreed, "where you still did good work." Before she could respond, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a neat bun approached, accompanied by a man around Mariah's age in a crisp server's uniform. "Mr. Hayes," the woman greeted. "Good morning." "Good morning, Lena," he replied. "This is Mariah, and this must be Ava." Lena smiled, immediately dropping her gaze to the baby first. "Hi, sweetheart," she cooed. "Welcome to our lobby." Ava studied her for a moment, then offered a curious little half-smile. "I'm Lena, head of HR," the woman said, turning her attention to Mariah. "And this is Daniel, our restaurant manager." "Hi," Mariah said, shaking their hands, forcing her fingers not to tremble. "Thank you for meeting with me." "We're glad you're here," Daniel said, his tone sincere. "Any friend of Mr. Hayes and any diner server who survived sunrise during Monday rush is someone I want to talk to." There was a flicker of shared understanding among the three of them that made Mariah's pulse slow, just a little. Maybe this wasn't a trap. They settled around the small table. Lena opened a folder with a simple form inside, but she didn't push it toward Mariah right away. "Before we get into paperwork," Lena said, "Alexander explained what happened yesterday. I'm sorry you went through that. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not in front of customers and while holding a baby." "Thank you," Mariah said quietly. The acknowledgement alone felt like someone had placed a soft hand on the bruise rather than pressing it. "What we'd like to do," Daniel added, "is talk about a trial position here in our main restaurant. It would be paid training at first, then regular shifts. We'd start with a schedule that lines up with childcare you can actually access. No chaotic changes every week." Mariah exhaled slowly. "What does that look like?" "3 consistent shifts to start," Lena said. "For example, lunch Thursday and Friday and brunch on Sunday. We can adjust around your classes if you share your schedule with us. As you get comfortable, we can talk about increasing hours." "And childcare?" Mariah asked. "I can't afford anything fancy." "We have a partnership with a daycare 2 blocks away," Alexander said. "For staff on certain routes, we cover a portion of the cost. We'll help you get on their list as soon as possible. Until then, we'll build shifts around when you know you can safely have someone with Ava." Mariah listened, every word like a drop of water on dry ground. It sounded too thoughtful, too planned, compared to the places that treated staff like parts of a machine. "What about pay?" she asked, forcing herself to be direct. "I'm not trying to be greedy. I just need to know if this can actually keep us afloat." "Hourly rate here is higher than what you are getting at the diner," Daniel said. "Plus, pooled tips. It won't make you rich overnight, but it should move you out of constant emergency mode." "And your night classes?" Lena added. "We value people who are studying in the field. If your goal is to move into management one day, that's something we can plan toward, not around." Mariah's heart gave a small, hopeful kick. "Hospitality certification," she said. "I'm halfway through." "You've done that much while raising a baby and working double shifts," Alexander said quietly. "That tells me more about you than any resume." She met his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that they both carried histories shaped by pressure, by scarcity, by people underestimating them. "I still don't understand why you're this involved," she admitted. "You could have just asked someone to send me an email." "I could have," he agreed. "But Sunrise is my responsibility. Collins represents my name when he treats people the way he did yesterday. I needed to see for myself who he thought was disposable. Turns out he underestimated the wrong person." Her throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. "Can I ask something?" she said. "What happens to him?" "That's not for you to worry about," Alexander said, his tone firm but fair. "We're reviewing his conduct. There will be consequences. The important thing is that his decision won't define your future." Mariah looked down at her hands, at the faint marks from years of hot plates and rough dishcloths. "Okay," she said finally. "What do you need from me today?" Lena slid the form toward her. "Basic details. Then, if you're willing, we can schedule your first training shift later this week. You'll shadow one of our senior servers, learn our system, and see if it feels like a place you can breathe." Mariah picked up the pen. Her hand shook for a moment, then steadied as she began to write her name. As she filled out the form, address, phone, emergency contact, her mind whispered its usual warnings. Don't trust too fast. Don't lean on anyone. Don't let yourself hope too much. But every time she glanced up, she saw Ava's stroller, rocking gently as the baby kicked her feet, and Alexander's calm profile as he spoke quietly with Daniel about shift coverage, already acting like this was real, not some experiment he would drop when something more interesting came along. Maybe, just this once, she could let herself lean a little. When the meeting wrapped up, Mariah had a training shift scheduled for Thursday, a starter packet of information about staff benefits, and a small envelope Lena had pressed into her hand. "Advance on your first week," Lena said, "so you don't have to go home today and panic about groceries." Mariah started to protest, but Lena shook her head. "It will be deducted from your first paycheck. It's not a gift. It's a bridge." The choice of word mattered. A bridge took you somewhere. Outside the office area, Alexander walked her back toward the lobby. "How are you feeling now?" he asked. "Like I'm standing on a different street than yesterday," she replied honestly. "Still scared, but it doesn't feel like the ground is crumbling under me this second." "That's a start," he said. As they reached the main doors, a group of business guests passed them, chatting about flights and meetings. None of them looked twice at Mariah with her stroller and staff packet. For the first time, that didn't make her feel small. It made her feel like maybe someday she could walk among them as someone who belonged in the building. "Thank you," she said, turning to Alexander, "for seeing me, for not just letting yesterday be the end." "You did the hard part," he replied. "You showed up." There was a pause, one of those quiet pockets of time where something could shift. He could have said more, told her how much she reminded him of a woman who had once carried him on her hip into a cleaning shift when childcare fell through. How he'd watched her get scolded and sworn back then that if he ever owned anything with his name on the door, no one would be punished for trying to be both parent and provider. But this wasn't the time to hand her his story. She was still in the middle of hers. "Can I check in after your first shift?" he asked instead. "Make sure everything's working for you and Ava?" She nodded slowly. "That would be okay." He smiled, small but genuine. "Good. Then I'll let you two go conquer your afternoon." Mariah pushed the stroller toward the exit. The glass doors parted silently, letting in a breath of cool air. On the sidewalk outside, she stopped for a moment, looking up at the hotel sign. "Baby," she whispered to Ava, "Mommy just wrote her name in a place she never thought she'd be allowed to sit." Ava kicked her legs and squealed, as if cheering. Mariah laughed, the sound light and surprised. "Yeah," she said softly, "maybe this really is the beginning of something different." Mariah's first training shift felt like standing on the edge of a new world, with old fears still hooked into her skin. Thursday morning, she arrived 20 minutes early. Ava at the daycare, 2 blocks away, thanks to the frantic paperwork Lena had rushed through the day before. Dropping her daughter off had nearly broken her. Watching those tiny hands reach for her and hearing the soft, confused cry when she left. "You'll be okay, baby," she had whispered at the door. "Mommy's doing this, so one day you won't remember what it felt like to be scared of the rent." Now, standing in the staff hallway behind the hotel restaurant, Mariah smoothed her new uniform top with trembling fingers. It was simple, black, tailored enough to look professional, practical enough to survive spills and stress. Her name tag felt heavy on her chest. First day, she turned to see a woman in her early 30s leaning against a metal shelf, tying her apron, dark hair in a low bun, sharp eyes that looked like they missed nothing. "Yeah," Mariah admitted. "Is it that obvious?" The woman's mouth curved into a small smile. "Only because you're standing like someone waiting for a fire alarm. I'm Kelly. I've been here 3 years. They said I'd be your shadow for today." "Mariah," she replied, grateful for the directness. "I used to work at Sunrise Diner." Kelly's eyebrows lifted. "The one on Maple, the place where managers think schedule is a suggestion and staff are disposable?" Mariah let out a short, surprised laugh. "That's the one." "Then you've already done hard mode," Kelly said. "This will still be intense, but at least here, if a manager crosses the line, someone higher actually cares." Mariah thought of Alexander in the lobby, of his quiet, controlled anger when he'd talked about Collins. "I'm starting to believe that," she said softly. They stepped through the swinging door into the restaurant. It was a different world. Soft lighting, polished cutlery, fresh flowers on each table. Guests in business attire or dressed up casual, not construction boots and trucker caps. The air smelled like real coffee and herbs, not burnt grease and desperation. "All right," Kelly said, slipping into a firm but friendly tone. "Here's how we do things. We don't survive on one superhero carrying the floor. We work in zones and we back each other. If you're drowning, you say something. If you see someone drowning, you throw them a rope. Mariah nodded, soaking in every word. For today, Kelly continued, you're with me. You'll shadow, take a few tables under my supervision, learn the system, ask questions. There are no stupid ones, only people too proud to ask before they mess up. Got it, Mariah said. And Mariah? Yeah? Relax your shoulders, Kelly advised. You look like you're bracing for someone to yell at you. Mariah exhaled, realizing how tense she was. Force of habit, she said. My old manager used to shout across the room whenever someone made a mistake. That sound still lives somewhere in my spine. Not here, Kelly replied. Here, if someone has feedback, they pull you aside. There's a difference between correction and humiliation. You deserve the first, not the second. The words settled over Mariah like a warm coat. As the lunch service began, she followed Kelly's lead, learning table numbers, watching the way she greeted guests, how she described dishes, how she read body language to know when someone needed more attention and when they wanted to be left alone. Notice table 4, Kelly murmured. They're on a tight schedule. See how often they check their watches? We keep their service fast and clean. Table 9, anniversary vibe. We slow the pace just enough so they can enjoy it. Mariah absorbed it all. Within an hour, Kelly handed her a small notepad. Your turn. I'll be right beside you. Mariah approached her first table, heart pounding. A couple in their 50s, dressed professionally but relaxed, looked up at her. Good afternoon, she said, voice steady. Welcome. My name is Mariah. I'll be taking care of you today. Would you like to start with water, tea, or something from the bar menu? The woman smiled. Water's fine, and maybe coffee for him. That sounds perfect, Mariah replied. I'll get that started while you look over the menus. If you have questions about anything, I'm right here. She stepped away, the old rhythm returning, only this time, without the constant dread of being yelled at from across the room. Service moved in waves. Orders came in, plates went out, checks were printed. The system was more complex than at the diner, but also more organized. When someone got backed up, another server stepped in without complaint. Still, not everyone was instantly welcoming. During a brief lull, a tall waiter with styled hair and an expensive cologne walked by, glanced at her name tag, and offered a thin smile. So, you're the new one from the diner? He asked. Yes, Mariah said. Mariah. He gave a non-committal noise. We get a lot of people here who think hotel restaurants are an easy upgrade. Just try not to slow us down, okay? Lunch rush is not the time for training wheels. Mariah's face warmed, but before she could respond, Kelly stepped in from behind him. Relax. Jonah, she said coolly. She's doing fine. You were spilling water and forgetting bread baskets your first week, remember? He rolled his eyes, but didn't push it. Whatever, just keep up. He walked off. Mariah exhaled. Thanks, she said quietly. Don't mind him, Kelly replied. He thinks speed is the only measure of worth. Alexander doesn't. Lena doesn't. I don't. You'll prove yourself with time. Mariah nodded, storing the moment away. Even in better places, there were people who assumed the worst. The difference here was that someone had stepped up beside her, not joined in. By the end of the shift, her feet ached, her back twinged, and her hair had frizzed slightly at the edges, but she hadn't dropped a plate, hadn't mixed up an order, and had even gotten a quiet, "Thank you. You did great" from Daniel as he reviewed the afternoon's numbers. On her way out of the staff area, she passed the glass wall that separated the restaurant from the lobby. Through it, she saw Alexander standing near the front desk, talking with the head concierge. He noticed her, excused himself, and came over. "How did it go?" he asked. Mariah shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I'm not going to lie and say it was easy," she said, "but it felt fair. Busy, demanding, but fair." "Any problems?" She thought of Jonah. "Only the usual new girl vibes from one person. Kelly handled it before I had to." A small smile tugged at Alexander's mouth. "Kelly is one of my favorite hires," he said. "She remembers where she came from. I'm glad she's the one training you." "She's good," Mariah agreed. There was a brief pause. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the air between them held something that wasn't just employer and potential employee. He had seen her at her worst. Today, he'd made sure she had a chance to show him who she was on a normal day. "That advance helped," she added more quietly. "I bought groceries on the way home yesterday instead of rationing cereal. Ava had actual fruit for the first time in weeks. So, thank you." "You earned that with every double shift you've already done," he replied. "This place just gives those hours a safer landing." Mariah hesitated, then asked, "Did you talk to Collins?" Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes," he said. "We had a meeting this morning." "Is he okay?" "His pride is bruised," Alexander answered. "He'll survive, but he won't be managing people under my name anymore." Mariah blinked. "You fired him?" "I repositioned him out of direct authority over staff," Alexander said. "He'll finish his contract in a role where he can't decide someone's fate based on a bad day and no empathy. What he did to you wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern." She wasn't sure what to say to that. Part of her felt a grim satisfaction. Another part felt a flicker of guilt, even though she knew she hadn't caused his choices. "He made his own decisions," Alexander added, reading her expression. "You're not responsible for the consequences he finally faced." Mariah nodded slowly. "I guess I'm just not used to the idea that someone like him actually answers to anyone." "Everyone answers to someone," Alexander said quietly, "even people like me." His gaze drifted for a second, as if remembering boardrooms, investors, shareholders, people who saw him as a number more than a person. "Do you?" she asked, curious despite herself. He smiled faintly. "Trust me," he said, "money doesn't erase pressure. It just changes its shape." The honesty in his voice surprised her. She glanced at the clock on the far wall. "I have to go pick up Ava," she said. "If I'm late, they charge extra, and I don't want to start this new life already falling behind." "Of course," he said. "Go. Get some rest tonight if you can. We'll see you for your next shift." "Okay," she replied. As she turned to leave, he added, "Mariah?" She looked back. "I'm proud you came," he said simply. "It's not easy to walk into a place like this when the world has taught you to expect doors to close." A knot formed in her throat. "Thank you," she managed, "for opening this one." She left the hotel with slightly lighter steps, the weight of the day mixed with something softer. Later that week, Alexander sat in his office on one of the upper floors. A view of the city spread out below, like a map of choices he'd once only dreamed of having. On his desk, 2 folders lay open. One was labeled Sunrise Staff Conduct Review. The other, thinner and newer, read Mariah Lopez Training Notes. He glanced between them, jaw set. Collins had not taken the meeting well. "You're overreacting," the manager had said, voice dripping with indignation. "She broke policy. I enforced it. You hired me to keep standards." "I hired you to keep standards," Alexander had replied. "Not to publicly break a young mother's sense of dignity to prove you have authority." She brought a baby into the workplace, Collins had insisted. We could be sued. There were a dozen ways to handle that without making her feel like she had no value beyond her apron, Alexander had said, tone ice calm. You chose the cruelest method because you were irritated, not because it was necessary. In the end, contracts and policy had given Alexander enough leverage to move Collins out of any role where he could harm people that way again. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. He closed that folder now and pulled Mariah's a little closer. Daniel's notes were clear. Quick learner. Handles stress well. Naturally good with guests. Needs time to adjust to higher-end expectations, but shows strong potential for leadership if supported. Alexander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He hadn't planned any of this. He'd gone to the diner to quietly assess a struggling investment, not to rearrange the trajectory of his week or his thoughts. But sometimes, life didn't ask for his permission. The image of Mariah standing outside the diner, holding her daughter and trying not to break, had lodged itself somewhere he couldn't ignore. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then put it down again. He had her number from HR, but calling her directly right now would blur lines he wasn't ready to blur. She needed stability, not confusion about where her boss ended and the man who had followed her out of a diner began. Slow, he muttered to himself. If this becomes anything more, it can't be because she feels she owes you. It has to be because she chooses you. The thought surprised him. In his world, most choices were strategic. Alliances, deals, partnerships that looked like friendships on the surface. Choosing someone because of the way they loved their child more than their own pride. That was new. He closed the folder gently. First, you make sure she and that little girl are safe, he said under his breath. Everything else can wait. Meanwhile, at home, Mariah sat on the floor with Ava in their small living room. A few days of work had already shifted the atmosphere in their apartment. The fridge, once nearly empty, now held fresh fruit, milk, and leftovers from a recipe she'd learned from a co-worker who swore by big batch cooking. The rent notice still sat on the table, but she had an envelope ready to cover it before the deadline. Ava sat among a small scattering of toys, some donated from a neighbor, one new stuffed animal Mariah had bought with a mix of guilt and joy. Look at us, Mariah said, smiling tiredly as Ava clapped her hands. Real food, real crib, real job. Who would have thought? Her eyes drifted to her notebook on the coffee table. She had added a new line under her old goal. Step 1, stabilize income. Step 2, finish certification. Step 3, apply for internal promotion when ready. She hadn't felt brave enough to write Step 4 yet. Somewhere, beneath all the practical steps, another possibility hummed quietly. Step 4, let yourself believe someone could love you and your daughter without turning it into a transaction or a burden. She shook the thought away for now. One miracle at a time. A notification buzzed on her phone. A message from Kelly. You did great this week. Don't let Jonah's attitude get to you. Also, staff are already asking who the new girl with the calm smile is. That's you. See you Sunday. Mariah smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Another message arrived a second later, from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. Good evening, Mariah. This is Lena from HR. Just confirming your adjusted schedule for next week aligns with your class times. Also, Mr. Hayes asked me to remind you not to ignore your own rest. She doesn't have to prove everything in the first week. His words. Mariah's cheeks flushed. She typed back, "Thank you, Lena. Schedule works perfectly. I'll try to rest. No promises, but I'll try." She didn't type the second part and tell him, "I'm not used to anyone worrying if I rest." Instead, she put the phone down, pulled Ava into her lap, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "I don't know how yet, but I can feel it." Ava laughed, grabbing her mother's nose. Mariah laughed too, the sound echoing in the small space like the first notes of a new song. The next few weeks turned Sunrise Diner's worst morning into the quiet start of a new life. By the third Sunday brunch, Mariah moved through the hotel restaurant like she belonged there. Her steps were still quick, but no longer frantic. She floated between tables with practiced ease, refilling coffee, checking on orders, reading faces the way some people read books. Guests remembered her name now. Some asked for her section specifically. "Mariah, right?" a woman in a navy blazer said one afternoon, folding her menu. "You took care of us last week. My husband still talks about how you remembered his extra lemon without writing it down." Mariah smiled, that warm, steady smile that came from somewhere deeper than habit. "I'm glad he enjoyed it. Let's see what we can do to top that today." Behind the scenes, she learned more than just how to carry plates differently. She learned the rhythm of wine service, the little cues that signaled which guests preferred conversation and which wanted quiet. She learned the computer system, studied daily specials, stayed after shifts to ask Daniel about how forecasting worked and what numbers meant for staffing decisions. "You're dangerous," Kelly joked one night while they rolled silverware together. "At this rate, you'll be running the place in a year, and I'll be asking you for my shifts." "Please," Mariah laughed. "I'm just trying not to drop dessert trays." "But you're also asking management questions," Kelly pointed out. "Most people just ask when they'll get weekends off." Mariah shrugged, a little embarrassed. "If I'm going to be here, I want to really be here, not just surviving day to day." Kelly's gaze softened. "One day, when you're in charge, remember how this feels. Remember what it's like for people who are just trying to stand up straight." Mariah filed that away like everything else. The real test came on a stormy Friday. Rain hammered against the tall lobby windows, turning the city into a blur of headlights and reflections. Roads flooded in low spots. Buses ran late or not at all. At 4:17 p.m., Mariah's phone buzzed in her apron pocket just as she set down a tray of appetizers. She excused herself politely, slipped around the service station, and checked the screen. Daycare. Her heart lurched. She answered immediately. "Hello? Ms. Lopez?" The daycare worker sounded tense. "I'm so sorry to bother you at work. The storm has knocked out some power in our area. Parents are coming early where they can. We're still open, but with the roads, we're not sure how late buses will be running." Mariah's mind raced. Her shift ended at 6. With the rain and traffic, getting across town could take much longer. If the daycare had to close early and she couldn't get there, she didn't even want to imagine Ava's fear. "Is she okay?" Mariah asked, voice tight. "She's fine," the woman assured her quickly. "A little fussy with the thunder, but she's safe. We just wanted to give you a heads up so you can plan. We'll stay as long as we can, but we might be forced to shut down if the outage spreads." "Thank you," Mariah said, hanging up with shaking fingers. Old panic clawed up her throat. The diner flashed into her mind. Collins's voice, the public humiliation, the feeling of being trapped between her job and her daughter's safety. Not again. She stepped out of the service station and found Daniel near the pass, checking tickets. "Can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level. He glanced at her face and immediately put down the slip he was holding. "Here, away from guests," she said. They moved a few steps back, near the staff hallway. "What's wrong?" he asked. "The daycare called," Mariah said. "Storm took some power. They're still open, but they might have to close early. With the roads like this, if I wait until the end of my shift, I might not make it in time. But if I leave now, I'll be dumping everything on you and the team." She hated how familiar the knot in her chest felt. "I don't want to abandon my post," she added quickly, "but I can't risk my daughter being stuck there if they're forced to close." Daniel listened without interrupting. In the past, she would have expected the answer before she finished speaking. Work comes first. Here, he took a breath, looked around the floor, judged their coverage, and then nodded. "Okay," he said. "Thanks for telling me as soon as you heard. Here's what we'll do. Finish with your current tables. I'll redistribute anything new to other servers. You'll leave in 15 minutes. I'll mark you as an early clock out because of emergency childcare. We've already updated our system for that exact situation. You won't be penalized." Mariah blinked. "You mean you're letting me go?" "I'm telling you to go," Daniel corrected gently. "Your kid comes first. The whole point of those policy changes was to make sure no one is punished for being a parent." She felt her throat close. "Thank you," she whispered. "Just text me when you get there, so I know you both made it safe," he said. "And be careful on the roads." She turned back to the floor, finished with her tables as quickly and kindly as she could, and handed off a pending check to Kelly. "Go," Kelly said, already adjusting her own rotation. "We've got this. Just get to Ava." The weight that had nearly crushed Mariah at Sunrise Diner loosened. It wasn't gone, but it didn't own her. By the time she reached the staff entrance, hair damp from the lobby's humid air, Alexander was coming down the hallway with a tablet in his hand. His steps slowed when he saw her. "You're off early," he said. "Everything okay?" "Daycare called," she explained. "They might have to close. Daniel is letting me leave to get to Ava before the roads get worse." A flicker of concern crossed his features. "Good. That's exactly how we designed the policy. Do you have a ride?" "The bus," she said. "I checked the schedule. If it's not too delayed, I should make it." He glanced toward the rain-streaked glass door, then back at her. "The buses are already running behind," he said. "I've been watching the alerts. You'd be standing out there for who knows how long. My car's downstairs. Let me take you." She shook her head instinctively. "You don't have to do that. You've done so much already. I don't want to cross any lines, and I don't want people to start talking." "People will always talk," he said quietly. "The question is whether what they say matches what actually happened. Right now, what's real is a single mom trying to reach her child before a storm shuts the city down. I'd rather be the reason you got there than the man who watched you stand in the rain to avoid rumors." Her pulse tripped. This was different from following her to a bus stop. This was choosing to step directly into her personal emergency. She weighed it quickly. The soaked sidewalks, the wind whipping around corners, the images she'd seen online of flooded intersections farther across town. "Okay," she said at last, her voice low. "If you're sure." "I am," he replied. "Come on, the car's close." They moved through the staff corridor to a side elevator that opened into the underground parking area. The storm's roar was muffled down here, but flashes of lightning still brightened the concrete ceiling every few seconds. Alexander's car was sleek, but not ostentatious. A dark sedan with clean lines. He opened the passenger door for her without making a show of it, helped her adjust the seatbelt where it had twisted, then settled behind the wheel. "Text the daycare," he said as he started the engine. "Let them know you're on your way." She did, fingers fumbling slightly on the screen. "Thank you," she said again, when the car eased up the ramp and into the streaming rain. "I know you didn't have to." "I remember what it feels like to be the kid waiting," he said, eyes on the road. "Watching the clock, wondering if the storm kept your mum from getting to you on time." She turned her head. "Your mother?" He nodded once. "She cleaned office buildings at night when I was little. Sometimes the sitter cancelled, and she had to drag me along with her. Once, the manager threatened to fire her if she ever brought me again. I remember standing in a stairwell, listening to him say things about her that I didn't really understand, but I understood the fear in her eyes." Mariah listened in silence. "That's the day I decided if I ever had a say in how people were treated at work," he continued. "I'd make sure no one had to choose between their job and their child's safety." "And now you do," she said softly. "For some people," he replied. "Not enough, but it's a start." Thunder rolled overhead. Wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the windshield as he navigated through pools of water gathering at the curbs. Despite the storm, she felt strangely calm, enclosed, not alone. "You know," she said after a moment, "I used to think people like you lived in some other universe, one where late rent notices don't exist, and storms are just something you watch through big windows with a drink in your hand." He huffed a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "Those windows exist," he said, "but so do memories. Money doesn't erase them. It just gives you better umbrellas." She smiled despite herself. "Is that why you notice me?" "Because I reminded you of her." "In some ways," he admitted, "but also because of the way you looked at your daughter, like she was the one thing you refused to let this world take from you." I recognized that too. Heat crept into her cheeks. She turned toward the window, watching blurred buildings slide past. The daycare came into view, a low building with a flickering sign and a small fenced play area out front. A handful of parents were hurrying in and out with umbrellas. Alexander pulled up as close as he could to the entrance. "Go," he said. "I'll wait here so you don't have to carry her through this alone." "You don't have to." "I know," he cut in gently. "Go get your girl." She hesitated once more, reading his face. There was no impatience there, just steady concern. She nodded, unbuckled, and sprinted through the rain to the door. Inside, the lights flickered once, then steadied. Children's voices buzzed in the background. A staff member met her at the sign-out desk. "Ms. Lopez, I'm so glad you made it," the woman said. "Ava's in the back playroom." Mariah followed the familiar path down the short hallway. Ava spotted her almost instantly, tiny hands slapping the floor as she scrambled up to toddle forward, cheeks damp, but eyes brightening. "Mama," she squealed. Just that one half-formed word cracked something open in Mariah's chest. She scooped her daughter up, burying her face in her curls. "I'm here," she murmured. "I'm here. I will always get to you." By the time they returned to the front, Ava nestled against her shoulder. Alexander's car was still idling by the curb. He hadn't moved. Mariah stepped back into the storm, shielding her daughter with her own body. The car door opened before she could juggle the handle. "Here," Alexander said, taking the diaper bag so she could settle Ava into the back seat. "Let's get you both home." As they pulled away, Ava pressed her face to the window, fascinated by the rain racing across the glass. "Can you believe this, baby?" Mariah whispered into her daughter's ear. "We're riding in a car that actually goes where it's supposed to, with someone who doesn't want anything from us except for us to be safe." She settled back, meeting Alexander's eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. "Thank you," she said again. The words felt bigger now, heavier with meaning. "Not just for the ride, for all of it." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "Just keep showing up, for her and for yourself." She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Something shifted. This wasn't just a boss making sure his employee got home. This was a man who remembered fear in stairwells and was now choosing to stand between someone else and that same terror. A new question began to form quietly at the edges of her heart. Not about whether she could trust his offer, but whether she could trust her own feelings as they slowly, steadily reached for him. For now, though, she let the car's motion and the storm's distant thunder be enough. She had her daughter in her arms. She had a job that didn't punish her for loving her child. And beside all that, a different kind of possibility was starting to glow like a light in the distance, waiting for the day she felt brave enough to walk toward it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the story between Mariah and Alexander stopped feeling like a one-time rescue and started feeling like a rhythm. At work, Mariah's confidence grew in layers. She learned how reservations worked, how to anticipate large parties, how to read the reservation screen, and predict when the kitchen would hit peak pressure. Daniel started asking her opinion on seating patterns and pacing. When a guest had a complaint about a delayed dish one evening, Mariah handled it with calm professionalism, listening fully, apologizing without groveling, offering a solution before the guest had time to raise their voice. "I'm impressed," Daniel told her afterward. "Most people freeze or get defensive their first few months. You stayed steady." "I've worked places where yelling was just part of the soundtrack," Mariah replied. "I promised myself if I ever had a say in the tone of a room, it would sound different." "You're already changing this one," he said. At home, her notebook began to fill with more than class notes and overdue sums. She kept lists now. New skills learned at work. Questions to ask in her next performance review. Ideas for small improvements in service flow. One night, she wrote a sentence and circled it twice. "Leadership isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who makes the room safer for everyone else." She didn't notice that the way she watched Alexander at staff meetings had changed too. How she noted the way he listened more than he spoke. How he learned everyone's name down to the dishwashers. How he never dismissed a concern about safety or respect as small. The first time her personal and professional worlds really collided was at the Staff Appreciation Day. It was a simple event, a Sunday afternoon when the restaurant closed early, and the hotel hosted a casual gathering on the rooftop terrace for employees and their families. There were snacks, music from a modest speaker, balloon animals for kids. Nothing fancy, but thoughtful. Kelly practically dragged Mariah to it. "You're coming," she insisted in the locker room. "And you're bringing Ava. That little girl hasn't met the staff, who keep asking when they'll see the famous baby who started the policy changes." Mariah laughed, but nerves fluttered in her stomach. "I don't want people to think I'm using her to get attention." "Or," Kelly countered, "they'll think you're a mum who survived a hard season and is finally allowed to show up as her whole self. So Mariah went. Ava toddled around in tiny sneakers, chasing bubbles and clutching a plastic cup of juice with both hands. The city stretched out around them, glittering in the late afternoon light. Co-workers who had only ever seen Mariah in uniform now saw her in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair down, laughing as she tried to keep up with a very determined toddler. "Look at her go," Kelly said, watching Ava wobble run after a balloon. "She's going to run this place one day." "One manager at a time," Mariah chuckled. "I've got to survive my certification exams first." She didn't notice Alexander approach until his shadow joined theirs. "Looks like someone enjoys rooftop views," he said, eyes following Ava's uneven steps. Mariah turned, feeling an odd little jump in her chest. He was dressed more casually than usual, dark jeans, an open-collared shirt instead of a tie. It made him look younger, less like a headline, and more like a man who might have once stood in a stairwell, listening to his mother being reprimanded. "She likes anywhere she can run in circles," Mariah replied. "But yes, the view helps." A gust of wind sent Ava's balloon skittering toward the edge of the terrace. Before Mariah could move, tiny sneakers slipped on a damp patch of stone. Ava toppled forward with a startled cry. Mariah's body reacted before her mind did, but she wasn't the only one. Alexander took 2 quick steps, reaching her daughter at the same time. He caught Ava gently under the arms before she could hit the ground, steadying her with surprising ease. "There we go," he said softly. "Got you." Ava blinked, surprised, then did something that seemed to surprise him even more. She threw her arms around his neck and clung there, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. Mariah's heart stopped. She had seen Ava shy away from strangers, even from well-meaning daycare workers on bad days. But here, she was holding on as if she knew this was someone she could lean into. Alexander's arms shifted automatically, one hand supporting Ava's back, the other cradling her head for a moment as he adjusted his hold. His jaw tightened, not with discomfort, but with something like emotion. "It's okay," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe." Mariah stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I've got her," she said, reaching out. "Thank you." For a second, Ava hesitated, turning her head between them as if weighing where to settle. Then, with the simple logic children use, she reached one arm toward Mariah while keeping the other hooked loosely around Alexander's collar. The 3 of them formed a small, unexpected circle. Kelly watched from a few feet away, eyes soft, saying nothing. Eventually, Ava let herself be transferred fully back into her mother's arms. But as she did, she patted Alexander's cheek with her tiny palm, as if marking him somehow. He swallowed, clearing his throat lightly. "She has a strong grip," he said, voice a touch rougher than usual. "She doesn't let go of the people she trusts," Mariah replied quietly. Their eyes met. The air between them shifted again, deeper this time. In that moment, it wasn't billionaire and single mom. It wasn't investor and employee. It was simply a man and a woman looking at each other over the head of a child who, without knowing anything about complicated adult worlds, had just chosen them both. Later, when the sun had dipped lower and most people were heading out, Kelly nudged Mariah toward a quieter corner near the railing. "You know he looks at you differently, right?" Kelly said, sipping soda from a clear cup. "Who?" Mariah asked, though she already knew. "Your storm chauffeur," Kelly replied, tilting her head toward where Alexander was talking with Daniel. "He's the boss, sure, but he doesn't watch everyone like that. There's softness there. Mariah felt heat rise in her cheeks. He followed me out of a diner. He gave me a job. He changed policies. Maybe he just feels responsible. Maybe, Kelly said. But responsibility doesn't usually look like the way he held your daughter, like she was made of glass and gold. Mariah said nothing. She didn't trust herself yet. Not her judgment, not her heart that had been wrong about men before. But when she glanced across the terrace again and caught Alexander's eye, the look that passed between them made something inside her settle instead of flare in alarm. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't possession. It was recognition. A few nights later, after a long shift and a quiet bus ride home, Mariah sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open. Ava slept in her crib, finally worn out from a day full of daycare adventures and rooftop discoveries. Mariah wrote, "Some people use power to remind you how small you are. Some people use it to build a bridge so you can stand beside them without shrinking." She paused, then added another line. "I don't know yet what Alexander is to me, but I know this. He never makes me feel like I owe him my fear to pay for his help." Her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. Unknown number again, but she recognized the rhythm now. "Hi, it's Alexander. Lena shared your updated availability for next month. Just wanted to say, proud of you for balancing work, classes, and motherhood. It's not invisible. Don't burn out trying to prove you deserve what you've already earned." She stared at the words for a long moment. Then slowly, she typed back, "Thank you. I'm still learning how not to live like everything can be taken away overnight. But having this job, these people, it's the first time in a long time it hasn't felt like it's me and Ava against the whole world." She hovered over the send button, nerves buzzing. Then she pressed it. The reply came faster than she expected. "It was never supposed to be you against the whole world. I'm glad we crossed paths when we did." Her heart knocked once, hard, against her ribs. She set the phone down, pressing her palm lightly over the screen, as if to hold the moment in place. Outside, the city kept moving. Bills still existed. Exams still loomed. Diapers still needed buying. But under all of that, something steady was taking root. A job that respected her, a community that saw her, a man who didn't flinch at her reality. What he'd told her and what he'd offered that first day had already changed her life. The question now was what they would both do with the feelings waking up quietly in the spaces between their shared responsibilities. For tonight, she let the possibility rest. She turned off the light, checked on Ava one more time, and lay down with one thought, comforting her more than any blanket. Whatever tomorrow brought, she wouldn't be facing it alone in a diner full of strangers. She had walked through a door that had stayed open, and somewhere above the city, in an office with its own view of the night, the man who had opened it was thinking about her too. Weeks later, Mariah could feel her life separating into two clear chapters. Before that Monday morning, at Sunrise Diner, and after the man from table 7 walked out behind her. Her nights were still long, but they were no longer spent staring at the ceiling in panic. Instead, she split them between rocking Ava back to sleep, finishing assignments for her hospitality classes, and reviewing notes from work. One evening after closing, Daniel called her into the office. Her heart jumped, old instincts whispering that closed doors meant bad news. "Relax," he said with a half smile as she stepped inside. "You're not in trouble. Actually, this is good." She sat on the chair opposite his desk, hands folded tightly in her lap. "You've been here a few months now," Daniel began, You've learned the floor, the system, the service sequence. You've handled rushes, complaints, and last-minute changes. You've also been asking about forecasting, staff rotation, and cost control. I like understanding how things fit together, Mariah said cautiously. That's exactly why we're having this conversation, he replied. We're opening a new restaurant concept in the hotel next door, a slightly more casual place with great food, but a family-friendly setup. We're going to need someone on the opening team who understands both the pressure of fast service and the standard we keep here. She blinked. You mean? I mean, Daniel said. Lena and I want to put your name forward as a shift supervisor in training. It's not a full management role yet, but it comes with extra pay, more responsibility, and mentoring. You'd still serve tables, but you'd also help with scheduling, onboarding new staff, and handling issues on the floor. For a moment, she was too stunned to speak. Me, she managed. I haven't even finished my certification. That's part of why this works, he said. You're studying while you're working. You're living what you're learning. We'll support you finishing your program, not ask you to choose between it and your job. Mariah's throat tightened. What about Ava? The daycare schedule? I can't do late nights without knowing she's okay. We've already thought about that, Daniel said. Most of your supervisory shifts would be mornings and early evenings. No back-to-back closings. And Alexander has approved expanding our childcare partnership for staff in leadership training. You'd be covered. At the mention of Alexander's name, a different kind of emotion stirred in her chest. He knows about this, she asked softly. He's the one who wrote, "Keep an eye on her for leadership," in your file, Daniel said. He sees what you're doing. Mariah stared down at her hands, overwhelmed. For years, she said slowly, I've been told I'm lucky just to have any job. Like I should be grateful for people who treat me badly as long as they hand me a paycheck. Now you're talking about training, development, future. That's because you have one, Daniel replied. You're not just passing through this industry. You belong in the rooms where decisions are made. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to make this about pity. What do I have to do? She asked. For now, he said. Think about it. Talk to your class advisor. Consider what the schedule would mean for you and Ava. We'll meet next week and see how you feel. Whatever you decide, your current job is secure. She nodded, standing on legs that felt strangely unsteady. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing more than just an extra pair of hands. As she left the office, she almost bumped into Alexander in the hallway. Sorry, she said quickly, stepping aside. No need to apologize, he said, noticing her expression. You look like someone who just got big news. She hesitated. Daniel told me you signed off on something, she said. Shift supervisor in training. His eyes warmed with something like pride. He did? You didn't know he was telling me today, she asked. I knew it was coming, Alexander said. I didn't know it was happening this minute. He studied her face. How do you feel about it? Terrified, she admitted. Then, after a beat, added, and honored. I never thought anyone would look at a single mom from a diner and think, leadership material. Then they weren't paying attention, he replied. You've been leading from the moment you walked in, calming guests, supporting your teammates, managing your schedule around your daughter and your classes. All we're doing is matching your title to what you already are. She laughed softly. You make it sound simple. It's not, he said, but you're allowed to grow. You're allowed to want more without feeling guilty. They stood in the narrow space between the office and the corridor, close enough that she could smell the faint warmth of his cologne under the professional polish. "I thought wanting more was being greedy," she said. "Like I should just be grateful we're not 1 week away from eviction anymore." "You're allowed to be grateful and ambitious," he answered gently. "Those things aren't opposites." Silence settled for a moment, comfortable rather than strained. "Alexander," she said quietly. "Yes? If I say yes to this, it means you'll see me fail sometimes," she said. "I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get tired. I'm going to have nights where Ava gets sick and everything falls apart again." "I know," he replied, "and I'm still standing here hoping you say yes." Her heart gave that now familiar unsteady jump. "Okay," she whispered, "then I'll think about it seriously. For me, not just for survival." His smile was small, but genuine. "That's all I wanted to hear." He stepped aside to let her pass, but as she brushed by, their hands grazed. A brief, accidental touch that sent a spark racing up her arm. She didn't look back. He didn't call her name, but both of them felt it. That night at home, after Ava finally drifted off, Mariah opened her notebook again. Instead of writing goals, she found herself doodling little boxes that represented shifts, trying to see how a supervisor schedule might fit around daycare and classes and bedtime routines. She was so focused on the page that she didn't hear her phone buzz the first time. The second buzz caught her attention. She picked it up, expecting a class reminder. Instead, she saw a new message. "Hey, I heard about your conversation with Daniel today. I didn't want to say too much in the hallway and put pressure on you. Just know this. Whatever you choose, it doesn't change the respect I have for you. Advancement is an option, not a requirement." She read it twice. Then she typed back, fingers moving slowly to match the weight of what she felt. "Thank you. I'm not used to choices that aren't just sink or swim. I want to choose what's right. Not just what looks impressive from the outside, but it means something that you've made space for me to decide." After a moment, another reply appeared. "Good decisions take time, and you've already made one of the hardest ones. You walked out of a place that broke you and walked into one that could build you. The rest will follow." She stared at the screen, heart full. Then, impulsively, she added, "By the way, thank you for catching Ava on the rooftop." "Anytime," he wrote back. "She has better balance than I do around you." Her breath caught. There it was again, gentle, unexpected, threaded with something that made the space between them feel more fragile and more precious at the same time. She didn't know yet exactly what his next move would be. She only knew that every step he'd taken so far, from the diner door to the bus stop, from the hotel lobby to the daycare curb, from staff policies to seeing her potential, had shocked everyone who believed power was only ever used to protect itself. In a world that had taught her to brace for the worst, he had become proof that some people still chose to be the answer to the prayer they once whispered as children. And in that quiet realization, sitting at her wobbly kitchen table with ink on her fingers and hope in her chest, Mariah understood the deepest life lesson of her story. Sometimes the miracle isn't that a billionaire sees you. It's that, after everything you've survived, you finally learn to see yourself the way he does, and choose to step into that version of your life with your head held high. Mariah stood at the bus stop the next morning with Ava on her hip, and that thought echoing in her mind. It's not just that he'd seen her differently, it was that she was finally starting to believe she could live as that woman every day, not just as a waitress, not just as a survivor, but as someone building something solid for herself and her daughter. The bus pulled up, brakes sighing. She climbed aboard, swiped her pass, and found a seat near the middle. Ava settled against her, playing with the edge of Mariah's sleeve, while the city slid by outside. Brick buildings, corner stores, people hurrying under jackets and coats. Ordinary life, except today, ordinary felt like a miracle too. Her phone buzzed. A new email notification popped up. Subject: updated schedule and training plan. Mariah. She opened it. Inside, Lena had laid everything out clearly. Confirmed shifts for the next month. Aligned with her class timetable. Training dates for the supervisor in training role if she accepted. Information about the expanded childcare support program for staff moving into leadership pathways. At the bottom, there was a note in Lena's own words: "You're not here by accident. We're invested in your growth. Take your time deciding, but know that we believe in your potential." Mariah closed her eyes briefly, letting the words sink in. Belief used to be a luxury she couldn't afford. Now people with actual power were saying it out loud to her, and backing it with actions, not just flattery. She glanced down at Ava. "What do you think?" she asked softly. "Should Mommy try?" "Really try?" Ava responded with a sleepy little hum and a pat on her mother's chest, as if saying, "Yes," in a language only they understood. Mariah smiled, turning her face toward the faint warmth of sunlight on the bus window. For years, she'd moved through life like someone trying not to disturb anything, careful, quiet, small. But lately, with every respectful shift schedule, every supportive conversation, every time Alexander used his voice to widen the path in front of her, she'd felt something straightening inside her. A spine, a center, a sense that she had the right to occupy space, not just pass through it. She opened her notebook again, balancing it on her knee. Under her list of goals, she wrote a new line, deliberate and steady. "Say yes to the supervisor training." She stared at the sentence for a moment, feeling equal parts fear and exhilaration. Then she underlined it. Twice. When she walked into the hotel that day, the lobby didn't feel like foreign territory anymore. She knew the staff at the front desk by name. The concierge gave her a quick nod. One of the housekeeping supervisors waved to her from the corridor, a silent hello that said, "You're one of us now." In the restaurant, Kelly caught sight of her and lifted an eyebrow. "Well?" Kelly asked, folding napkins with quick hands. "Have you decided if you're going to come rule over us all?" Mariah laughed. "I'm not ruling over anyone," she said. "But I'm in. I told Lena I'll do the supervisor training." Kelly's face broke into a grin. "That's what I like to hear," she said. "Someone who's walked the floor should be helping run it." Daniel joined them a moment later, a clipboard in hand. "Congratulations," he said simply. "We'll start you shadowing a few of the senior supervisors next week. You'll see the difference between putting out fires and preventing them." "And if I mess up?" Mariah asked, because the old fear still whispered. "Then you'll learn," he replied. "That's how every one of us got here." Behind them, Alexander stepped through the side entrance, having just finished a meeting upstairs. He didn't interrupt, just observed for a second. The way Mariah stood straighter, the way her smile reached her eyes when she talked about training, the way the team leaned toward her instead of away. When she finally noticed him, their eyes met across the room. There was pride in his, there was gratitude in hers, and under both, something else was starting to settle, a quiet mutual understanding that their story had moved beyond a single morning at a diner. This was becoming a life, one she was choosing, not one she'd been forced into. That night, after another long but satisfying shift and a bedtime story read twice because Ava loved the pictures, Mariah sat back at the same small kitchen table where she'd once held a business card like a lifeline. The bills were still there. Life was still far from perfect. But next to the bills was a nearly complete certification application. Next to that, a new staff handbook with her name listed not just under service team, but in the annex where leadership development candidates were recognized. And above them all, pinned to the wall with a piece of tape, was a sticky note she'd written for herself. "You are not just surviving anymore. You're building." She looked at Ava, asleep in the crib. She thought of Alexander in his office, probably finishing another round of emails, carrying his own quiet scars. And for the first time in her adult life, the future didn't feel like a hallway of locked doors. It felt like a house she was helping design, brick by brick, choice by choice, with people beside her who wanted to see her stand upright. Her story had started with the worst day of her working life. It had carried her through humiliation, fear, and the shock of a stranger stepping in when no one else did. But the most important part wasn't the moment he changed everything. It was the moment she realized she was allowed to change too. Not into someone else, not into a polished copy of people with easier beginnings, but into the strongest, truest version of the woman she already was, a mother, a worker, a leader in the making. And maybe, slowly, one day soon, a woman ready to open her heart to the man who had shown her, not with promises, but with consistent action, that love built on respect and protection could actually belong to her. Mariah didn't realize how much had changed between her and Alexander until the night everything went wrong, and he was the first person she thought to call. It started with a phone notification at 9:47 p.m. She had just finished an online lecture, earbuds still in. Ava asleep in her crib with her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. The apartment was dim except for the glow of her laptop screen. Her phone buzzed on the table. Urgent. Building notice. Possible gas leak. Evacuate immediately. She sat up straight. A second later, someone pounded on the hallway doors outside, voices calling for residents to get out now. Gas company's on the way. Everyone outside. Don't stop to argue. Just move. Adrenaline hit so hard, her fingers tingled. Mariah grabbed Ava, wrapping her in a blanket, heart racing as she stuffed diapers and her phone into a small bag. There was no time for anything else, not the notebook, not the food in the fridge, not the stack of carefully organized papers on the table. "Shh, baby," she whispered as Ava stirred, confused by the rush. "We're going outside for a bit. It's okay. Mummy's here." The hallway was chaos. Doors opened, people stepped out in pajamas and jackets thrown over t-shirts. Someone shouted about pets. Another neighbor argued with the building superintendent. The sharp, faint smell of something chemical threaded through the air, making her throat tight. On the street, they stood in a scattered crowd under cold night sky. Sirens wailed in the distance. A fire truck pulled up, then a utility van. Tape went up. Officials moved with clipped efficiency. "Ma'am," a firefighter said when she tried to ask how long this would take, "we don't know yet. Gas company has to clear the lines. Could be an hour, could be overnight. You can't go back in until we say it's safe." "Overnight?" she repeated, holding Ava tighter. "But all our things are in there. Her food, her clothes, everything." I'm sorry, he said not unkindly. Do you have somewhere you can go? Family? Friends? Her family was 3 states away. Her closest friends either worked night shifts or lived in buildings just like this one paycheck away from the same kind of emergency. Ava whimpered, rubbing her eyes. The night air nipped at her cheeks. For a long second, Mariah just stood there, paralyzed. Old fear crowded in, memories of nights spent calculating which bill to pay, which risk to take, how long she could stretch nothing. Then, without overthinking it, her hand moved. She pulled out her phone, scrolled past her mother's number, past classmates, past Kelly. Her thumb stopped on a name that felt both too big and exactly right. Alexander. She hesitated, heart pounding. He's your boss. He's a billionaire. He has a life. Meetings. People who call him for emergencies that have commas in the numbers. But then she thought of the daycare storm night, of him insisting she not stand in the rain, of the way he had looked at Ava on the rooftop, catching her like the most precious thing in his arms. If this isn't the type of moment you're allowed to lean on someone, she thought, what is? She pressed call. The ring felt like it lasted an hour. Mariah, his voice came through on the 3rd ring, alert despite the late hour. Is everything okay? No, she said honestly, her breath fogging in the cold. There's some kind of gas leak in my building. They evacuated all of us. We're on the street with nothing, and her voice broke. I don't have anywhere we can go tonight. There was no pause, no sigh. Where are you exactly? He asked. Send me your location. I'm on my way. Alexander, I didn't call to… Mariah, he cut in, firm but gentle. You called because you and your daughter need somewhere safe. That's exactly the right reason. Text me your PIN and stay where there are people and lights. I won't be long. Her chest constricted. Okay, she whispered. We'll be here. She hung up, sent her location, and held Ava closer as the little girl shifted restlessly. Someone's coming to get us, Mariah murmured into her daughter's hair. We're not doing this alone. For the first time in a crisis, that sentence didn't feel like wishful thinking. It felt true. Mariah shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep Ava shielded from the wind as the minutes stretched. Blue and red lights flashed against the apartment building's windows. Voices rose and fell. Neighbors complaining, kids crying, officials answering the same questions again and again. Every few seconds, she checked her phone like it might somehow cancel the night. Then a dark sedan turned the corner and pulled up near the police line with quiet authority. It didn't belong to this street, not with that smooth engine, those clean lines. The driver's door opened. Alexander stepped out. He didn't look like a billionaire arriving at some distant problem. He looked like a man who had left whatever he was doing without thinking twice. His coat was thrown over a simple shirt, hair slightly mussed, tie missing. His eyes found hers almost instantly. He crossed the distance in long, purposeful strides, slowing only when he reached the crowd so he wouldn't trample anyone in his urgency. Mariah, he said, voice low but steady. Are you okay? The sound of her name in his tone brought a knot to her throat. We're outside, she managed. They said gas leak. No one goes back in until it's safe. They don't know how long. We have nothing with us. He looked at Ava, whose cheeks were pink from the cold, her little hands clinging to Mariah's jacket. Hi, Ava, he said gently. Rough night? Huh? Ava blinked at him, lower lip wobbling. Come on, he said, turning to Mariah. Let's get you both out of this wind. You can explain on the way. Alexander, wait, she said. instinctively glancing at the officials. They're going to want to talk to residents. I don't want to cause trouble. He nodded and walked over to the nearest fire officer, introduced himself calmly, and explained that he was taking one of the residents and her child to a nearby safe place for the night, leaving his number if they needed follow-up. The officer, who had already been juggling a building full of people, took one look at the shivering baby and nodded. We'll call if we need her statement later. She doesn't need to be standing out here with a child. Alexander returned and held out his hand, not to touch Mariah, but to help guide them through the bodies and bags. Come with me, he said. Please. She didn't argue again. She let herself be led to the car, carefully easing Ava into the back seat. The interior was warm, soft, a complete contrast to the concrete and flashing lights they were leaving behind. Once the doors were closed and the world outside became a muted blur, the silence in the car felt almost unreal. Alexander pulled away slowly, giving the emergency vehicles space. For a moment, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and Ava's small, tired breaths. Talk to me, he said quietly. What happened? Notification came to my phone, Mariah said. Then someone was knocking, shouting for everyone to get out. They said possible gas leak. I didn't even have time to grab clothes. Just her. You did exactly the right thing, he replied. Everything else can be replaced. The two of you can't. She stared at the dashboard, jaw tight. I know that in my head, but looking at that building, that's everything we have. Our clothes, her crib, the food I just bought with my new paycheck. If this goes badly, it's gone. If this goes badly, he said, we'll deal with it. Together. She swallowed hard. I didn't call you for money or a solution, she said quickly. I called because I didn't know where else to go. I don't want you to think I expect… Mariah, he interrupted gently. You called because you needed someone you could trust to show up. That's all. You don't have to apologize for that. The words hit something deep. Trust. She hadn't used that word about anyone outside of Ava in a long time. Where are we going? She asked after a moment. To my place, he answered simply. It's closer than any decent hotel that isn't full tonight, and I'm not dropping you and your daughter in some random room across town. You can have the guest room. There's space, it's warm, and it's safe. She stared at him. Your home. Yes. With your things, your life, your privacy. All of which matter less to me, he said quietly, than knowing you're trying to keep a toddler calm on a sidewalk all night because you're afraid to ask for help. Her chest tightened. This is a lot, she admitted. I don't want to cross lines. He glanced at her, eyes steady. The only line you're crossing, he said, is the one between colleague I care about and friend I refuse to leave out in the cold. Anything more than that is a conversation for another day. Tonight is about safety. The word friend settled over her with a strange mix of comfort and ache. She nodded. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Alexander's building rose out of the night in clean lines and soft light, set back from the street by an understated entrance. No flashy signs, no shouting wealth. It looked like a place built for quiet. He parked in a secure underground lot and came around to help with the door before she could even unbuckle completely. I've got the bag, he said, taking the little backpack with Ava's few things. You take her. Emily, no, Mariah, the name she'd carved out for herself, shifted Ava onto her shoulder. The baby clung to her, thumb in her mouth, eyes heavy but alert. They rode the elevator up in silence. Mariah watched the floor numbers climb, feeling like she was being carried into someone else's world again. But this time, she wasn't here to serve or clean. She was here because he'd decided she belonged somewhere safe. When the doors opened, they stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of wood and something warm. Alexander unlocked his door and pushed it open. "Welcome," he said quietly. "Come in." The apartment was spacious, but not sterile. Warm tones, soft lighting, shelves with books that actually looked red. A large window framed a glittering view of the city at night. "Wow," Mariah breathed before she could stop herself. "It's just walls and furniture," he said. "Right now, it's a roof over your heads. That's the part that matters." He led her to a guest room down the hall. "You can stay here," he said, flicking on the light. The room held a wide bed with a simple comforter, a dresser, and a small chair by the window. He crossed to the closet and pulled out a folded travel crib. "This is for my sister's kids when they visit. We can set it up for Ava." "You keep a crib here?" she asked, surprised. "Kids happen," he replied with a small smile. "I like them to have a place they recognize when they visit." Between them, they set up the crib in the corner. Ava watched, eyes drooping, then allowed herself to be lowered into the soft mattress, clutching her blanket. Mariah tucked her in carefully, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "You're having a sleepover you'll never remember, but Mommy definitely will." When she straightened up, the room felt unexpectedly small, not in size, but in the way emotions had rushed in to fill it. "Do you need anything?" Alexander asked. "Clothes, food, anything I can send someone to get?" She shook her head. "Not tonight. I'm just glad she's safe and warm." He nodded once. "You will be too." He gestured toward the hallway. "Come have some tea. You're still shaking." She hadn't noticed until he said it. Her hands were indeed trembling, adrenaline slowly draining away. In the kitchen, he put a kettle on without fuss, moving with the ease of someone who actually used his own space. "You make your own tea?" she asked, a small smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "All the time," he said. "Don't let the suit fool you. I've made more midnight tea than some people have had hot meals." Something about that sentence made her chest ache. He handed her a mug, once it was ready, the warmth seeping into her palms. They settled at the small table near the window. The city glittered below them like a million unanswered questions. "So," he said, not pushing, just inviting, "how are you really?" She took a sip, letting the heat steady her. "Scared," she said honestly. "Relieved. Angry at myself for not having a backup plan, even though I know most people don't have backup plans for gas leaks." "No one does," he said. "Emergencies always feel like personal failures because they hit us where we're already tired." She looked at him, surprised by the accuracy. "You talk like someone who's been through a few." He smiled faintly. "You know about some of it already," he said. "My mother dragging me to cleaning shifts, people threatening her job, nights in places that didn't feel like home." He paused, fingers tracing the edge of his mug. "We had a night like this once," he continued. "Not a gas leak, burst pipe. The building flooded. They kicked everyone out while they figured out where the damage started. My mother sat with me on a curb from midnight to 3 in the morning because we had nowhere to go, and she was too proud and too scared to call anyone. I remember being cold and trying to pretend I was fine so she wouldn't feel like she'd failed." He glanced at her. "Tonight, I decided I never wanted anyone connected to me to feel like that, if I could help it." Her throat tightened. "You're not responsible for everyone," she said softly. I know, he replied, but I'm responsible for what I do with what I have. And if what I have can keep a little girl and her mother from shivering on a sidewalk all night, then that's a very easy choice. Silence settled between them. Comfortable this time. Thank you, she said, for coming, for letting us be here, for treating this like it matters. It does matter, he said simply. You matter. The way he said it, without performance, without drama, hit her harder than any grand gesture. She looked out at the city lights, then back at him. Do you ever get tired, she asked quietly, of being the one everyone expects to have the answers? He huffed a small breath that wasn't quite a laugh. All the time, he admitted. But then nights like this remind me why I fought to get here. Not for the headlines, for the moments when my decisions can actually change something for someone who used to be me. Her eyes burned. You know, she said, I used to think love, if I ever found it, would look like big words and dramatic scenes. But lately, it feels more like this. Like what? He asked gently. Like someone answering the phone on the third ring, she replied. Like someone showing up in the cold. Like someone making sure the crib is set up before you even know what to ask. Something in his expression softened, like a door opening quietly inside. Mariah, he said, her name a little rougher now. I need you to know something. Her heart kicked. Okay. I didn't do any of this, expecting you to feel anything back, he said. I stepped in, because it was right, because I couldn't not. If this never becomes anything more than one person helping another build a safer life, it will still have been worth it. She swallowed. But what if it already is more? He froze, just for a heartbeat. What if, she continued, voice shaking but honest, every time you walk into a room now, it feels like the air changes. What if I find myself writing goals in my notebook and imagining you seeing them? What if I am grateful for the job and the policies and the safety, but I'm also starting to care about you in ways that have nothing to do with any of that? He held her gaze, every line of his face serious. Then, he said slowly, we have to be very careful, because your job, your dignity, your independence, they come first. I never want you to look back and wonder if you said yes to me because you thought you owed me for opening doors. I don't feel like I owe you, she said quietly. I feel like I'm growing beside you. There's a difference. The room seemed to shrink around them. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met, he said. You walked into my world on the worst day of your working life and somehow managed to stand taller with every new challenge. I respect you. I admire you. And yes, his voice dropped. I'm starting to care about you in ways that have nothing to do with schedules or training plans. Her breath hitched. So, what do we do? She whispered. For tonight, he said, we let you sleep in the guest room with the door locked, if that makes you feel safe, knowing that you're not alone in this building. Tomorrow, we check on your apartment. Then we take it one honest conversation at a time. No rush, no pressure, just room for this to be real if it's meant to be. Tears spilled over, hot and unexpected. I haven't had anyone say no rush to me in years, she said. Everything's always been urgent, desperate. Take this or lose everything. He reached across the table, stopping halfway, giving her the choice. After a long second, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, not possessive. Then let this be different, he murmured. For a long while, they sat like that. Two people who had fought their way through very different kinds of storms, holding hands in a kitchen above a city that kept moving regardless. No grand declarations, no dramatic music, just the quiet, earth-deep knowledge that something had shifted. Not because he saved her, but because she had finally met someone who used his strength to make space for hers. In the weeks that followed, the gas leak turned out to be a serious but contained issue. Her building needed repairs. Tenants were given temporary housing options. Mariah and Ava didn't have to scramble. When hotel staff heard what had happened, they didn't whisper about gossip. They dropped off extra clothes for Ava's size, a spare stroller, toys their kids had outgrown. "You're not alone anymore," Kelly said, hugging her in the break room. "We don't let our own fall through the cracks." Mariah moved into a better apartment closer to the hotel, a place she could afford now with her new pay and careful budgeting. Alexander didn't sign the lease for her. He didn't hover. He simply connected her with a reliable landlord and let her handle the rest, stepping in only when paperwork got unnecessarily complicated. Their relationship grew in the spaces between shifts and classes, between daycare pickups and late-night texts. Sometimes it was a cup of tea in the staff lounge after close, talking about their childhoods. Sometimes it was him dropping off a small bag of groceries unannounced on a week he knew her hours had been cut short for training. Nothing fancy, just basics, with a note that said, "So you don't have to think about this on top of everything else." Sometimes it was Ava running down the corridor at the hotel on a day Mariah brought her by after daycare, tiny feet pounding the carpet as she launched herself at Alexander with complete trust. The first time Ava called him something that sounded suspiciously like Lex, he almost forgot how to breathe. They waited months before sharing their first real kiss. It wasn't in some dramatic setting. It happened in Mariah's new kitchen after a long day, Ava finally asleep, homework spread out on the table. She'd been laughing about something clumsy she'd done in training, and he'd been standing close enough that when the laughter faded, there was nowhere for the tension to go except forward. "Is this okay?" he'd asked, voice low, giving her one last out. "Yes," she'd said, choosing it with her whole chest. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, full of careful respect. Then it deepened, not rushed, but certain, like two people finally stepping onto a path they'd been walking beside for a long time. When they pulled back, she didn't feel scared. She felt seen, chosen. Not as a charity case, not as a project, but as a woman he wanted to build a life with, brick by brick, routine by routine. By the time a year had passed since the diner morning, everything looked different. Mariah wore a supervisor's badge now, her name listed on schedules as someone's staff went to for guidance. She'd finished her hospitality certification, walking across a small stage, while Alexander sat in the back of the room, clapping just as hard as anyone else. Ava was a little older, a little taller, still reaching for both of them, with sticky fingers and boundless affection. And on a quiet evening, after dinner, dishes had been washed and put away, after bedtime stories had been read, Alexander took Mariah back to the same bus stop bench, where he'd first offered her a way out of desperation. "Do you remember what you told me that day?" she asked, looking around at the familiar cracked pavement. "I remember most of it," he said, "but I want to hear your version." "You said losing that job wasn't the end," she replied, "that it was just one man's decision, not a verdict on my life." "It still wasn't enough," he said. "You deserved more than just a different job." He turned toward her, eyes steady, heart in his throat. "Mariah," he said softly, "I wanted to bring you back here because this is where everything changed for me too. I came to that diner as an investor. I left as someone who couldn't pretend anymore that numbers were more important than people. And then I met you." She felt her chest tighten, tears already pricking. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. Her breath caught. "This isn't about rescuing you," he said, voice low but firm. "You don't need saving. You've proved that 100 times. This is about asking if you'd let me keep walking beside you. As a partner, as someone who wants to wake up to the sound of Ava's feet in the hallway and your laugh in our kitchen. As someone who wants to build a home with you, not just offer you one temporarily." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Elegant, but not exaggerated. A single stone, set in a band that looked sturdy rather than showy. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Not because of what I can buy, not because of what I did back then, but because of who we've become together since." Tears spilled over freely now. Mariah looked at the ring, then at him, then past him at the diner sign in the distance, still flickering, unaware that it had once been the backdrop to the most important turning point of her life. She thought of all the nights she'd held Ava, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She thought of the first shift in the hotel, the storm night, the gas leak, the rooftop, the texts, the shared cups of tea. She thought of the way he had never once asked her to be smaller to fit into his life. "Yes," she whispered, voice breaking. Then louder, firmer. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, with hands that trembled just a little. It fit as if it had always been meant to rest there. He stood, pulling her up with him, and kissed her under the same streetlight that had once watched her walk away from everything she thought she needed to survive. When they parted, she pressed her forehead to his. "Don't forget to like this video," she said suddenly, laughing through tears, "and subscribe if you believe your worst day can still turn into the beginning of your best life." He laughed, startled, then shook his head in mock disbelief. "You've been doing this voiceover thing too long," he said. "Maybe," she replied, wiping her cheeks, "but our story is going to help someone remember they're not stuck where they are. That's the point, right?" He nodded, his expression soft. "That's always been the point," he said. A car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating them. Single mum, billionaire, little girl waiting at home, all woven together by one unfair morning, one simple act of courage and a series of choices to use power to protect instead of control. Mariah looked up at the sky, then at the man beside her. Her life didn't look anything like the plans she'd scribbled in notebooks years ago. It looked better, not because it was easy now, but because it was honest, shared, and rooted in a love that had proven itself in crisis after crisis. In the end, the story her viewers would hear wasn't just that a billionaire saw a hard-working waitress fired for bringing her baby and shocked everyone with his next move. It was that a woman who had once apologized for taking up space learned to stand in the center of her own life, loved by a man who saw her clearly, and by a little girl who had known all along that her mother was a hero.